Have you ever wondered why the official history of the 19th century falls apart at the seams once you apply a bit of logic and mathematics to it? We've been lied to our whole lives. We were told fairy tales about bearded men in bast shoes and top hats, who, with the help of chisels and horse-drawn power, erected structures that we cannot replicate even today with our tower cranes and laser levels. You have been deceived. Globally, cynically, and admittedly, very professionally. But any lie, no matter how grand, leaves traces. And today, we will follow these traces to uncover one of the most chilling secrets of the so-called Victorian period. Look at the Crystal Palaces. London, 1851, Munich, 1854, New York, 1853, Madrid, Sydney, St. Petersburg. Around the world, as if by command of an invisible conductor, giant, incredibly complex structures of glass and metal suddenly emerge. Historians assure us that these were merely exhibition pavilions. Consider this nonsense. Empires spend colossal resources, thousands of tons of cast iron, millions of square feet of premium glass, to construct a building for half a year, hold an exhibition of national achievements, and then dismantle it. Or, even more suspiciously, allow it to burn to the ground in a matter of hours? Here begins the most interesting part. Let's take a calculator and simply do the math. The Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. Official length, about 1,850 feet. Height, about 108 feet. Area, nearly 800,000 square feet. This is a size comparable to modern international airport terminals. And we are told that this marvel of engineering was built in just 9 months. 9 months! Have you ever seen a modern shopping mall made of concrete and sandwich panels built at such a speed? Now transport yourself to the mid-19th century. No electricity, no welding, no trucks, no cranes. Everything was held together by rivets and bolts. According to official reports, only 2,000 people were involved in the construction. The math here works against the historians. To meet these deadlines, workers would have had to install 1,000 glass panels per hour without stopping for sleep or food. This is physically impossible. But even more shocking is the question of logistics. Where did all that glass come from? In the mid-19th century, plate glass was a luxury item. Its production technology was complex, expensive, and slow. And yet, 300,000 sheets of perfectly quality glass delivered to the site within tight deadlines. No factory of that time, judging by the preserved archival data on production capacities, could have produced such a volume. This means only one thing. The glass was not produced specifically for the palace. It was either taken from the warehouses of a previous, more advanced civilization, or the production technologies were completely different, and they were hidden from us. Let's look at the architect. Who is this genius who designed a building a century ahead of its time? Joseph Paxton. Have you heard this name? Do you know who he is? An engineer? A world-renowned architect? No. He is a gardener. An ordinary gardener who built greenhouses for the Duke of Devonshire. The official version states that his experience in building conservatories allowed him to create the design for the Crystal Palace. And this is where historians inadvertently reveal something. They tell us the truth, but we don't hear it. It really was a greenhouse. A gigantic industrial greenhouse. But what was grown in this greenhouse? Palms? Exotic flowers to delight Queen Victoria's eyes? Don't make me laugh. To build a structure the size of several football fields, spending the budget of a small state just to show ficus plants to the public, this is economically impractical. Any government, be it a monarchy or a republic, is pragmatic to the core. If something is built, it must bring concrete, tangible benefits, and this benefit must outweigh the costs. Pay attention to the climate inside these palaces. The structure created an ideal greenhouse effect: stable temperature, high humidity, UV protection, yet maximum natural lighting. These are ideal conditions for growth, but not for plants. Look at old engravings and the first daguerreotypes of the interior. What do we see there? Huge empty spaces, strange reservoirs, fountains that more closely resemble fluid circulation systems, and many sculptures. Antique, snow-white sculptures of people with perfect proportions. Now compare this with another fact that is not often mentioned in school textbooks: the demographic explosion of the mid-19th century. After the strange events of the early century, which many researchers call the Mud Flood or the catastrophe of 1812 to 1816, the Earth's population suddenly begins to grow exponentially. Cities that stood half empty and buried in mud suddenly fill with people. Where did they come from? Did women suddenly start giving birth to 10 children? And did all of them survive in unsanitary conditions and without medicine? Mortality statistics of that time suggest the opposite. Infant survival rates were extremely low. But the population grew. The answer might be so frightening that your brain will want to reject it. But facts are stubborn things. The Crystal Palaces are not exhibition halls. They are incubators. They are giant laboratories for growing biological mass, new people, or those who were meant to replace the population lost in the catastrophe. Sounds like the raving of a madman? Then explain to me the phenomenon of orphan trains. In the mid-19th century, around the world, from London to New York, hundreds of thousands of homeless children appear. They are called foundlings. In the United States alone, from 1854 to 1929, more than 250,000 orphan children were transported from eastern cities to the Midwest. 250,000 children without parents. Where did they come from in such numbers? Where were their parents? There was no war, nor a plague epidemic. Why do historical chronicles remain silent about a mass death of the adult population that could explain such a number of orphans? These children appeared out of nowhere. They filled orphanages. They were loaded onto trains and sent to settle vacant territories. New farmers, new factory workers, new soldiers. They didn't remember their parents. They had no past. Perfect cogs for the new system. Perfect citizens for a new world that was being built on the ruins of the old. And now, let's return to the Crystal Palaces. Paxton's greenhouse. Greenhouse effect. Ideal temperature. Huge volumes of water. Strange baths and pools, which were later disguised as fountains. We look at the blueprints of these buildings and see complex ventilation and heating systems, which are far too redundant for a simple exhibition hall where people walk around in their outerwear. Why maintain a tropical microclimate in London for an exhibition of machinery and locomotives? Metal doesn't need humidity. It's harmful to it. Humidity is harmful to fabrics and carpets. To paintings, it's deadly. But for biological processes, humidity and heat are the foundation of life. And one more detail. Look at the lifespan of these palaces. They appeared suddenly, performed their function for several years, and then were just as suddenly destroyed. The scenario was always the same: fire. The Crystal Palace in London burned down. In New York, burned down. In Munich, burned down. Glass and iron don't burn, you might say. Oh, they burn excellently if the combustion temperature is extreme, or if someone very much wants to hide traces of what was happening inside. Fire is the best way to destroy biological remains, documentation, and equipment. After a fire, only a melted shell remains, which is quickly dismantled for scrap metal. Loose ends tied up, more precisely, turned to ashes. Do you still believe that these were simply exhibitions? Then why were infant incubators so often demonstrated at these exhibitions? Yes, this is an official fact. In the late 19th century, at exhibitions in Europe and America, the public was shown glass boxes with premature babies. This was presented as a medical marvel, as an attraction. People paid money to see infants in glass flasks. But what if this was not a demonstration of new technology, but the remnants of an old, large-scale program that was simply legalized and monetized when the need for industrial scale diminished? What if we were only shown the tip of the iceberg, calling it an attraction to conceal the true purpose of these technologies? Let's cast aside emotions and turn to the dry, merciless physics of materials. Official history claims that the Crystal Palace in London was built of glass and iron. It sounds commonplace for the 21st century, but for 1851, it sounds like science fiction. We are told that almost 300,000 panes of glass were required for glazing. 300,000. Can you imagine this volume? In the mid-19th century, the technology for producing plate glass by drawing had not yet been introduced on an industrial scale. Glass was blown. Consider this. A glass blower gathered mass into a tube, blew a cylinder, then this cylinder was cut and flattened in furnaces. This was manual, hellishly difficult labor. The sheets produced were small, cloudy, and contained air bubbles. Now look at the photographs of the palace. We see huge, perfectly transparent panels of standardized size. To produce such a volume of glass by hand in a few months would have required an army of glassblowers exceeding the population of London at the time. Where are these factories? Where are the mountains of rejects, which are inevitable with such production? Where is the coal for the furnaces, the volume of which should have covered all of England in soot? They are absent. Historians are silent because they cannot explain the appearance of hundreds of thousands of square feet of premium glass out of thin air. This glass was not produced in the 19th century. It was taken ready-made. Or, even more likely, the building itself stood there long before the official construction date, and the construction was merely an operation to restore and de-mothball an object from an ancient civilization. Let's move on to the metal. The palace's framework consisted of thousands of cast iron columns and trusses. We are proudly told that this was the first modular building in history, assembled like a construction set. Allegedly, parts were cast in Birmingham, transported by rail, and assembled on site. And once again, the lie shatters against logistics. The weight of the structures amounted to thousands of tons. Railways of that time were single-track lines with steam locomotives that barely pulled a few cars at the speed of a walking person. To transport such a volume of metal in a few months would have required paralyzing all transport links in the country. But there is no mention of a transport collapse in the newspapers of that time. Cargoes appeared on the site instantly, as if through a portal. The assembly technology raises even more questions. Was assembly carried out at a height of about 100 feet, without safety harnesses or cranes? Engravings depict cheerful workers lifting multi-ton beams with ropes. Any structural engineer will tell you that this is nonsense. Installing such spans requires heavy machinery, precise calculations of loads, and hydraulic lifts. If even one beam deviates by a millimeter, the entire structure of fragile cast iron and glass would collapse like a house of cards. But the palace stood monolithically. It withstood hurricane-force winds. It withstood vibrations from millions of visitors. This is a level of engineering that we can barely replicate today. They want us to believe that yesterday's peasants with hammers did this. Pay attention to the very shape of the building. It's not just a box. It's a complex, arched structure, resembling a giant waveguide or resonator. Glass and metal, dielectric and conductor. From a physics perspective, the Crystal Palace is a giant capacitor, a device for storing energy. But what kind of energy? Electricity and outlets did not yet exist. Gas lighting on such a scale would have been a fire hazard and inefficient. But the palace glowed. Light penetrated everywhere. Perhaps the structure itself accumulated atmospheric electricity. Ethereal energy, about which Tesla wrote and which was so diligently erased from physics textbooks. If this building was a power station, or rather a life support station, then the incubator theory receives powerful technical confirmation. For growing biological organisms in an artificial environment, energy is needed. A lot of energy. It is necessary to maintain temperature, fluid circulation, and the operation of pumps. By the way, about the pumps. The fountain system of the Crystal Palace is a separate mystery. Water jets shot up to a height of nearly 330 feet. Can you imagine the pressure required for this? Officially, we are told about steam engines hidden in the towers, but steam engines of that time choked the sky with black smoke and rattled so loudly that one's ears would ring for a mile away. Visitors to the palace described silence and fresh air. No soot, no rattling. This means the pumps operated on a different principle. All water was supplied under pressure from giant underground reservoirs, about which we know nothing. And here we come to the most interesting part. What is hidden underground? The foundation. Such a colossal structure requires a foundation extending tens of feet deep. But in official construction reports, suspiciously little attention is paid to the foundation, as if the building was simply placed on the grass. This is impossible, unless the foundation and underground levels already existed there for thousands of years. What if the Crystal Palaces are just the tips of icebergs, above-ground domes of giant underground complexes? Recall how often in 19th-century cities, during the construction of subways or sewers, strange brick tunnels were encountered that led nowhere. In London, Paris, Moscow, entire cities are hidden underground. Official science calls them collectors or catacombs. But the quality of masonry there surpasses modern standards. What if the Crystal Palaces were part of a single planetary system? A system that survived after the catastrophe, and the new masters of life, who seized power after the mud flood, found a way to turn on these machines. They didn't build them. They simply pressed the on button, and the machine started working. A machine for producing life. A greenhouse for people. That's why they were built, restored, so quickly. The framework was there. The underground infrastructure was there. It was only necessary to insert the glass, found in warehouses, and start the process. But why? Why, specifically in the mid-19th century, was such a quantity of new people needed? Where did the old population go? Why do cities in old photographs stand empty? The answer lies in a catastrophe that was hidden from us under the term Little Ice Age, or Year Without a Summer. The world was cleansed. The former civilization was destroyed, or significantly thinned out, by a powerful cataclysm. Perhaps a war using unknown weapons, leaving behind craters that we now call round lakes. The elite, having survived in bunkers, emerged to the surface and found an empty world. A world without working hands. A world that needed to be urgently repopulated to restore infrastructure and ensure their comfortable existence. They needed slaves. Obedient, without memory of their lineage, physically strong, but devoid of ancestral knowledge. And they activated ancient incubators, the crystal palaces. This explains why these buildings were called palaces for the people, although the people there were only as exhibits or raw material. This explains the giant doors and ceilings. They were designed not only for people of our height, but also for those who managed these processes, or for those who were cultivated there before us. After all, we know legends of giants. Perhaps these are not legends, but discarded batches from a previous production cycle. Have you ever tried to compile your family tree? Truly, with archival documents, parish registers, and birth records. If you try to do this, you will inevitably encounter a strange, frightening wall. 1850. For 90% of the world's population, the family history ends precisely at this date, or slightly later. Before that, emptiness, darkness. Either records are missing, or they are destroyed, or your ancestors literally appeared out of nowhere. Official history tells us archives burned, peasants were illiterate. But why is this memory gap so global, so planetary? Why does it coincide in time with the construction of the crystal palaces and the so-called Industrial Revolution? Consider why, precisely in the mid-19th century, a total unification of everything occurs across the planet. Before this moment, the world was colorful, chaotic, diverse. And suddenly, as if by the flick of a switch, a single standard is introduced. A single metric system, uniform brick standards, a uniform railway gauge, uniform time with time zones. But the most terrifying thing is the standardization of people. It was during this period, synchronously with the launch of the Crystal Palaces, that the Prussian model of school education was introduced in all countries. We are told that this was done for the enlightenment of the masses. What a noble lie. Schools of that time were not places for creativity. They were factory conveyors. Bell for class, bell for dismissal. Strict discipline, rote learning, uniform attire. This is programming. If you raised millions of biological units in incubators, you need to upload an operating system into their empty heads. They need to be given a language, basic skills for operating mechanisms, and most importantly, a false memory of a past they never had. Look at the surnames. Smith, Miller, Taylor, Kuznetsov, blacksmith, Plotnikov, carpenter, Melnikov, miller. In the mid-19th century, millions of people received surnames derived from professions. Why? Is it not because these were not ancestral names, but inventory tags? You are a blacksmith, so you will be Smith. You are a miller, you will be Miller. This is not a family. This is the functional designation of a bio-robot in the new economic system. These people had no history, so they were given a function instead of a name. And now let's return to the exhibitions in the Crystal Palaces. Examine the exhibit catalogs carefully. Besides weaving looms and steam hammers, prosthetics were exhibited in huge quantities. Artificial arms, legs, glass eyes, dentures. We are told this was due to the consequences of wars. But there were no major world wars at that specific moment. Why such a quantity of spare parts for people? The answer is terrifying in its cynicism. The cultivated product often had defects. The accelerated growth technology failed. New people quickly wore out. Their teeth fell out, their limbs failed, and the system immediately offered a solution: Mechanical parts. 19th century cyborgization. Notice the strange fashion of that time for corsets and rigid collars. This is not just a style. These are exoskeletons. A weak spine, underdeveloped back muscles in creatures grown in artificial gravity or in the aquatic environment of an incubator required external support. Women could not walk without corsets, not because of beauty, but because their bodies would break without a framework. But the crystal palaces performed another function that physicists are silent about. Sound. Resonance. These giant volumes of glass and metal are ideal resonators. Eyewitnesses claimed that a strange hum always filled the palaces, and the organs installed there were the most gigantic in the world. The organ in the London Crystal Palace had 4,500 pipes. Why? Music? No. Infrasound and ultrasound. Vibration of a certain frequency can affect cellular structure, accelerate regeneration, and, most importantly, suppress free will. These palaces were giant emitters that broadcast a frequency of submission to the entire surrounding area. They structured not only the water in the incubators, but also the consciousness of those who were within range. These were the cell towers of their time, only they worked not with phones, but directly with the brain. And here we come to the proof that lies right beneath our feet, literally. Look at the buildings in your city, supposedly built in the 19th century. Why are their first floors sunken into the ground? We are lied to about cultural layers. They say that people didn't clean up dirt for centuries and it buried the windows. Do you seriously believe that 3 yards of soil can accumulate in 100 years? And that homeowners simply converted doors into windows and continued to live in the basement? This is a lie. The buildings are buried. These are traces of that very mud flood, or carpet bombing with soil, that destroyed the previous civilization. The Crystal Palaces were built on top of this chaos, but their basements. The basements went down, deep, to the surviving communications of the old world, to where atmospheric electricity was preserved, where pneumatic mail and underground roads, which we now call subways, operated. The London Underground opened in 1863, powered by steam. Imagine a steam locomotive in a tunnel. Smoke, soot, lack of oxygen. Passengers should have suffocated in 5 minutes. But they rode. This means the traction was not steam-powered. Steam locomotives were drawn in later to hide the free energy transportation technologies that the new masters found in the underground and used to transport biomass and resources between incubators. The system was global. The palace greenhouses above received sunlight. The underground levels provided energy and transportation, and between them, the process of creating service humans took place. But something went wrong. Why was the project shut down? Why were these magnificent palaces destroyed one after another? Perhaps the new people started asking questions? Or perhaps the genetic memory of those whose DNA was used as a basis awakened. A glitch in the matrix occurred in the late 19th century. We see this through strange events, epidemics of madness, outbreaks of revolutions, mass unrest. The software malfunctioned. The bio-robots went out of control, and then the puppeteers decided on a great purge. They needed to erase the traces of the laboratories and rewrite history again. The era of great fires began. Chicago, Boston, Seattle, cities burned to the ground, though there was nothing to burn there, stone and brick. But they melted like wax under temperatures that cannot be created by ordinary kerosene. Look closely at photographs of the ruins after the so-called Great Fires of Chicago, Boston, or Seattle. Your eye, accustomed to destruction from Hollywood movies, may not notice the trick, but an engineer will see the impossible. The granite blocks of the foundations are not cracked by heat, they are melted. The stone flowed like clay, turning into a shapeless mass. Metal structures evaporated, leaving only ghostly outlines. Yet wooden buildings and paper newspapers a couple of blocks from the epicenter remained untouched. The official version about Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocking over a kerosene lamp is a slap in the face to physics and common sense. These were not fires. This was a cleanup using high-power directed energy weapons. The crystal palaces and the centers of old star cities were destroyed precisely and dispassionately. The incubator project was completed. Millions of new people had been cultivated, taught primitive skills, and were ready for work. The giant greenhouses, having served their purpose, became dangerous for the new masters of the world. They were too obvious a testament that we live on the ruins of a civilization of gods. But the main reason for the destruction lay in energy. The domes and spires of these palaces were receivers of atmospheric electricity, free, clean, and infinite ether. Consider why, precisely at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, there was a sharp change in technological paradigms. We were forcibly hooked onto the hydrocarbon needle. Oil, coal, gas. Resources that must be extracted with hard labor, transported, sold, and for which one can kill. Ethereal energy cannot be put into a barrel and sold for dollars. It cannot be controlled by a meter. Therefore, Tesla's technologies and the knowledge of the old world were declared pseudoscience, and the crystal palaces, generators of free energy, were turned into heaps of melted slag. We were led to believe that smoking factory chimneys represent progress, and the clean energy of the past is a myth. We became slaves to meters and tariffs, not even suspecting that our ancestors, or those who lived here before us, received light and heat directly from the air. The operation to falsify history was brilliant. Ugly concrete boxes were built on the ashes of the greenhouses. The memory of the mud flood and the incubators was erased within 2 generations. But the system left behind some markers. The genetic code of those grown in Paxton's test tubes carries a ticking time bomb. We feel that this world is a stage set. We look at ancient statues with a longing we cannot explain. This is not just an interest in art. It is a subconscious search for our true creators. But who are they? And where are they now?